Welcome in to the College Football Power Hour on a conference championship weekend edition of the podcast. That's Jason Fitz, he's Adam Breneman, and I am Caroline Fenton. We at least have a clearer vision of what the results are going to look like on Selection Day. Full disclosure, this podcast is being recorded as soon as the Big Ten and ACC Championship games ended, so we're here on Saturday night before the rankings come out, but we at least have a clearer vision of what tomorrow will look like with the first round buys and where seeding might look like. Still a lot of deliberation on that front, but I do want to start with the SEC Championship game, a game that I felt like I saw so many tweets, Adam, that said, like, this feels like this is the national championship. This feels like this is a battle between two of the best teams in the country. And I didn't get that vibe.
Yeah, I thought that, at times in this game, it felt like Texas really outplayed Georgia. You think about the first half in this game, and Texas outplayed Georgia. Texas outplayed Georgia in nearly every aspect, but they lost in two of the key fundamental things that coaches preach all the time: scoring in the red zone and not committing penalties. Those are the two areas where you lose football games. If you play well, you can play well in the midfield, but if you don't play well in the red zone, you lose games. That's what happened to Texas. I thought overtime was a perfect picture of how it played out offensively for Texas in this game. They couldn't just make the one big play in the red zone. Not one single red zone touchdown for Texas on 3 trips. Their one score came from the 41-yard line. So I thought that was really the story of this game for Texas and Georgia, playing that kind of bend but don't break defense in the first half that allowed them to stay in this game. Another big factor was Texas had 80 penalty yards against them in the first half alone. And I heard Sark complaining about the holding calls and the penalties against his offense, but man, they're running those outside zone plays and those perimeter running plays, and that's when you get called for holding calls. That's why a lot of teams don't run those plays. So you can't call plays that are susceptible to holding calls and then be upset when they get called. That's just part of the game, Coach Sark, and I get it. It wasn't always fair, but that's what happens. For Georgia, Carson Beck was playing another okay game. Up and down, had some good moments, had some bad moments, went out with the injury, and then that's when Gunnar Stockton came in. And I'll say this, a lot of times backup quarterbacks are some of the most liked guys on the teams. I've been on so many teams where everyone loves the backup quarterback. He's putting in all the work every day. He doesn't get to shine. And when that guy sees the field, it can be a complete momentum shift for an offense. And we saw that when Stockton took the field and went on that first drive down the field and scored. That was a game changer for Georgia. And he threw that brutal interception in the fourth quarter. Can never do it in that situation. But he gave life to this Georgia team that desperately needed it. And, I thought Stockton deserves a lot of credit just for how he brought this Georgia team back to life. And, listen, this is a backup quarterback that can win games. The way he runs the football, the way he managed that game at times, the way he led them to victory is good enough to be one of the top teams in college football. So I was impressed with the second half Georgia team that we saw.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, he did what he's good at doing, right? You could tell early on that when he started to get reps in this game that he's comfortable with his legs, he's comfortable with one read, get rid of the ball, and he did a really nice job of that. So I was watching a kid come into the moment. The moment didn't feel like it was too big for him. Even taking the hammer of a hit that he took late in the game, is still popping right up. It's just he was ready for this moment, which I think is a testament. But y'all, I think it's important because we're going to talk about all these games, and we saw obviously a Big Ten championship game with a lot to talk about for the lack of defense, and we could turn this game into how great the defense was. But I also saw offenses that just were out of sync and leaving plays on the field. There were opportunities in this game for Quinn Ewers, who just, every week I feel like I'm sitting here saying, when are we going to see the Quinn Ewers that we are expecting to see? In this game, I thought was going to be that landmark moment. And it wasn't, right? The Texas offense never really got rolling the way any of us thought they would get rolling in this game. Nothing looked easy. And while we consider and credit it to great defense, this just felt like a clunky game by both sides. I walked away from this saying, yes, you're an SEC champion, congrats. But I didn't walk away from this. If I'm the rest of the college football field, I did not look at this and say, oh my God, you know who I'm scared of? The SEC champion. I didn't think either of these teams represented themselves as well as they have at other times throughout the course of the season, Caroline.
I didn't feel like, wow, the winner of this game is going to win the national championship. I did kind of feel that way in the Big Ten championship game, which we will get to later on in the podcast. But I feel like I've described both of these teams at some point in the season as like a toxic ex-boyfriend. As soon as you start to trust him again, he betrays your trust, and he's out late at night and he's not answering your texts, and he's sliding in DMs of the Instagram models. Texas just happened to be the toxic ex-boyfriend of the week, because after Texas beat Texas A&M in the fashion that they beat Texas A&M, Texas's defense shut Texas A&M out. The only 7 points that Texas A&M had on the board was from, coincidentally enough, a Quinn Ewers pick six. That Texas looked like such a complete team that I felt like Texas played a much more dominant performance against Texas A&M than the final score would indicate. So at that point, I thought, okay, I think I'm ready to trust Texas. I think I'm finally ready to move on from the last time that we broke up, and I'm ready to move on from all the red flags that you showed me in the past, because I feel like you finally built up that trust again. And then here we are, whenever Georgia put up only 277 yards of offense. You have a backup quarterback in the entire second quarter, and the Texas defense can't stop it. Whenever Georgia's able to run the ball for 150 yards, or maybe just shy of 150 yards, and you have a backup quarterback and you can't stop the run. Like, this is a Texas defense that has been elite. This is a Texas defense that has been winning Texas games. This is a Texas defense that I said can win Texas a national championship. Where was that tonight? Where was that Texas defense that got Texas to the SEC championship to begin with?
The one thing that makes me feel pretty good about Georgia moving forward is that their defense made up for that lack of offensive firepower in the first half. And the way they did it, I was watching this kind of defensive masterclass I thought Georgia put on at points in this game. Wasn't always good, but at points they stepped up in a big way. And it was really all about Georgia's defensive front controlling the game by exploiting the way Texas does pass protection. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So they were Georgia's defense constantly forcing Quinn Ewers into uncomfortable situations by using simulated pressure and then true blitz packages. So simulated pressure is when it's what it sounds like. It's like a fake blitz. It's where you rush four guys, which isn't a blitz, but one of those four is like a linebacker coming. So it looks like a blitz, but it's still only four guys rushing the quarterback. It's where you drop out a defensive end, and that's it. That's what coaches call simulated pressure. Well, they used a ton of that, where they could still have their seven guys in coverage and rushed four, but it looked like a blitz to Quinn Ewers, and it got him off track a bunch. And then the other thing Georgia was doing was pre-snap overloading on one side of the ball, which would then make Texas slide their pass protection to that side of the ball, thinking the rush is coming from the left, and then they would bring delayed pressure or a twist to the opposite side, and that's how they were getting home. It led to 6 sacks. It disrupted Quinn Ewers' timing, and then particularly on third down and long, Texas was in an average of 11 or 12 yards. I saw the stat on third down in yards to go. So it put them in really bad spots behind the sticks in those situations. The other key adjustment for Georgia came in the second half to really shut down the quick passing game for Texas. Georgia started pressing their corners, playing aggressive man coverage. It forced Quinn Ewers to hold the ball longer, which then allowed that pass rush to get home because Quinn Ewers had to hold the ball a little bit, and the Georgia corners could hold up. So that defensive scheme not only limited the explosive plays, but it also created turnovers, averaged 2 interceptions. It was really, I thought, a masterclass in leveraging scheme, in the execution, and the adaptability to change what you're doing on defense. But that defensive front and how they manipulated their protections and showed it coming one way and then brought it from the other way, disrupted Quinn Ewers all night long.
6 sacks, 15 tackles for loss speaks to that, right? That's a glaring number in this. But Adam, so now, and that's a beautiful breakdown by you. So let me ask you this just point blank. Where was the counter adjustment from Sark? Because one thing that we've been pretty consistent on this show is that Sark has done a really beautiful job of having his own bag of tricks. Why did Texas never seem to get into any of that bag of tricks offensively? It just felt like there wasn't any counter punch to the punch that they were getting.
Yeah, I thought that in the second half there that when Georgia started running that press man and bringing their corners up, I mean, that your only option to beat that is that your receivers have to win one-on-one. That's the only way it can possibly happen. And we saw a couple shots down the field that Texas just didn't convert on in that game. Like, there's nothing Sark can do if his receivers aren't winning one-on-one against Georgia's corners. Because now, if they don't win, that just means Quinn Ewers is a sitting duck back there waiting to get hit, essentially, because he has nowhere to throw the football to. So, I thought there were at times in this game that Sark had a good plan. I mean, I thought that even early in the first half, the way they were running the football and in the middle of the field, they played really well. But what I thought Sark didn't do a great job of is that red zone game plan, where the red zone is like a game within the game. Things change in the red zone. So when coaches game plan for a game, coaches have a whole different call sheet for when you're inside the 25-yard line. Like, you have an open field call sheet for where your plays are, and then it all changes. I mean, you do a practice day just on 25-yard line and in. And I think Sark lost that battle. There were a lot of Kirby versus Sark battles in this game. Sark lost the battle in the red zone. I would have loved to see some earlier play action shots down the field too. Don't be in these situations where you want to throw the ball when you want to, not when you need to. Texas was in too many situations. I mentioned the third down 11 yards to go was their average. Too many situations where they had long yardage to go on third down, and everyone in the room, everyone in the building knew they were throwing the football.
Well, and when you throw the ball 46 times, you can't tell me that script.
Way too many.
They had this coming in 46 times. But Caroline, one thing you've been clear on is that Texas has been running the football better. They didn't in this one. Like, when your starting running back averages under 3 yards a carry, you're just in a game that was close. Like, this was not a game that ever got out of hand. This isn't a game where they were forced to go off script. Like, they just were never able to execute the script the way any of us thought they would. So, that's a testament to Georgia's defense. But the fact that they never got the running game going it's got to be a huge part of this conversation too.
And you say starting running back, which is 100%. You're talking about Trey Wisner. Well, they have two starting running backs between Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue, two guys that they trust very much so to be their bell cow back on any given Saturday. And then, by the way, you add that extra little sprinkle, that little layer on top of what Arch Manning is able to do with his legs. We at least saw him out there for one play today. So that's what has added the second dimension to Texas's offense. That, I think, is part of what has made us trust Texas so much more over the last couple of weeks, is because I don't think any of us in this room necessarily trust Quinn Ewers game in and game out and day out to win football games consistently with his arm. Can he do it? Sure, he can do it, but I don't trust Quinn Ewers to do that on a consistent basis, and especially when you're running it for 1 yard per carry, which was the clip that Texas was running at it today. But I don't think that it's a coincidence that the two times that at least I have questioned how good Texas's offensive line really is the two games that Texas has played against Georgia. And I've asked myself, for so many years, Kirby was able to win every game. He was able to win to get to the pinnacle of the sport, but and even in years that he won national championships, he still wasn't able to beat Nick Saban. I know we're one season in with Texas in the SEC. I know we're only 2 games into this Texas and Georgia quote-unquote rivalry, if that's what you want to call it. But it feels like whatever weird juju Saban had over Kirby Smart's got it over Sark.
Yeah. The question is, what's all that mean? Because you're right, Caroline, but if you look back at their wins in something that we all have been pretty clear on, if you look back at this season, they haven't played a lot of teams that have really challenged them. Georgia is a good example of one that has. When they get into the college football playoff, and we'll know tomorrow who that matchup is up against, there are plenty of teams on that college football playoff list that are going to be able to challenge Texas's offensive line. Like that, I walked away, and look, I'm not trying to be a hater on a lot of these teams today, but I walked away with less confidence in most of the teams that we saw over the course of today than I had yesterday. Like, I have less confidence. I don't know that I had a ton in Georgia anyway. They've been too up and down. But I walked away from this from a team in Texas that I thought had a real shot at trying to go out and plant their flag to be the number 1 team in the country. Remember, they didn't know what the Oregon result was going to be when they were on the field. They needed to go absolutely all out in this game to show the committee, hey, we're number 1. And instead, I walked away from it thinking, man, I don't even know that I trust you against against a Tennessee, or I trust you against a Notre Dame, or I trust you against, certainly don't trust you against a Penn State. Like that version of Texas to get their ass kicked by Penn State. So like I'm looking at this saying like my faith in Texas is a little broken tonight.
Yeah, and I left today's slate of games thinking to myself, I feel much better about these Big Ten teams than I do the SEC teams. And not a good time for the SEC to be lobbying for these 4 teams in the playoff and everyone beats up on each other. I mean, I saw a Penn State and Oregon team, both those teams that I think would beat SEC or would beat Georgia and Texas. So it's interesting. And it really is with the top of that conference. And I get that the SEC is a much deeper conference top to bottom. But man, I mean, that Oregon and Penn State, and we'll break it down, looked like better teams than Georgia and Texas did. And there's so many mistakes. I mean, Texas to miss 2 field goals in this game, I mean, that's the margin. That's it right there. Texas missing those 2 field goals. So many mistakes, so many penalties, and even for Georgia too. I mean, that I talked about Gunnar Stockton. I mean, that interception he threw at the end of the game almost cost them that game, almost cost them that SEC championship. One of the worst mistakes you can make as a quarterback in that situation. A lot of sloppy football in this SEC title game.
If there were not guaranteed, I'll say this, if we were still in a 4 playoff system and there were not guaranteed bids for the conference champions, I'm not sure Georgia or Texas has shown enough to deserve to be in a 4-team college play. If they're in this year, we'll see what happens. But like right now, I don't think either of them are playing like the top 4, like what I usually associate with the 4 best teams in the country.
Yeah, I mean, Fitz, you say your faith in Texas is, you're selling it. You're selling stock in Texas faith at the moment. I'm kind of doing that with Georgia too. Yeah. Even in a game that they won, even with an SEC championship game. It's like I want to trust both of these teams because I've seen the level that they can play at, but I just can't because both of these teams have shown what their floors are. Both of these teams have shown what their ceilings are as well, but we see too much of the ebb and the flow and the high and the low and the good and the bad and the sloppy and the playing really well. And it honestly, both of these teams played incredibly sloppy tonight. It was just a matter of one team had Trevor Etienne and one team didn't.
My final thought on Georgia, Texas, I want to give a little hat tip to the Kirby Smart fake punt call in the 4th quarter that extended that key drive that led to the go-ahead field goal in the game. I thought that was a gutsy call, and I feel like Kirby's good for those every now and then. Like no one thought it was going to happen. I forget where they were on the field exactly when they ran it, but it was a great play call, and for your team to execute those the right way in the biggest moment says a lot about your head coach.
Well, with all the good grace that Kirby Smart has built up for you, did you hear his moaning and whining at the end of the game?
With you talking about with the scheduling?
Yeah. When he was asked, what does this mean for you, or what the bye week, whatever the question was, and he said, "We're gonna rest because Greg Sankey and the SEC made us go on the road all season long." And look, Georgia had a gauntlet of a schedule, but I am playing the world's tiniest violin for you, Kirby.
The best part was Greg Sankey was standing right beside him and looked absolutely pissed. Like wasn't even. I'm sure there aren't any Christmas cards getting sent to each other between Kirby Smart and the Greg Sankey households.
Greg Sankey was just staring into the abyss. Like, I'm about to send a strongly worded email later, and you're going to be the beneficiary of that, Kirby Smart. Okay, that was the SEC Championship. Let's get into a little Big 12 action after a quick break. So we said it on the preview pod. I think that was the only conference championship game that we all picked Arizona State, and we all said it for the exact same reason, and it was Cameron Scadaboos. Can we just give ourselves a round of applause? Because man, oh man, were we spot on. Cam Scadaboo was absolutely electric. Arizona State made a massive statement against Iowa State, no pun intended, with all these state teams playing in the Big 12 title game. Cam Scadaboo, 170 yards, over 10 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns. Sam Levitt, super efficient, 70% completion, 220 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Arizona State's defense forcing 3 turnovers. It was domination from the Sun Devils today, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, give Arizona State all the credit. Nothing sums up the Big 12 quite like Arizona State being picked dead last, 16th in the preseason poll, and winning the conference title by 26 points. And doesn't that just sum up the Big 12 this season? Coming into this game, I said on our show this past week, Arizona State's key was that have to continue to not turn the football over. They've been one of the best in the nation in taking care of the football. It doesn't matter how well Cam Scadaboo plays if you turn it over. And that's what happened today. Arizona State ended up being the storyline of taking care of the football. And then ASU broke the game open by forcing those 3 turnovers in the second half that you mentioned, Caroline. I'll say this, if one play describes Kenny Dillingham this season, there was a 4th and 1 play on Arizona State's own 34-yard line, up 10-7. And ASU sends an offensive lineman out at wide receiver, brings him in motion, and that is a typical sign of a run play. When you have an offensive lineman out wide, bring him in motion, you're going to kick out a defensive end with that lineman, run the ball on 4th down and 1. What does Kenny Dillingham do on that 4th and 1 play? Brings the offensive lineman in motion and takes a play-action shot down the field when the entire defense tries to fit the short yardage run. It's a bomb. Sam Levitt makes a great throw. Touchdown. ASU's up 10 on a situation where most would have punted. And that play call embodies what Arizona State is this season. They take risk. They play for each other. They clearly play for their head coach. And they have some gamers, man. I mean, Cam Scadaboo. That's a guy that probably won't play in the NFL, but man, do they have him playing good college football right now? Sam Levitt is a gamer. Huge 4th down pickup with his legs in this game in Iowa State territory. I thought there were so many moments where this Arizona State team looked like they were complete, looked like they were ready to play. And I'll tell you what right now, this is not a team that I'd want to see in the first round. This is a team that's playing really good football right now and has played as well as anyone in the country over the last 5 weeks.
Of all the teams we've seen this weekend through championship games, I would say that the Oregon team we saw was the best team we saw. I think Penn State in a loss was the second best team we saw. And I think if we're looking just at what we saw this weekend, Arizona State was the 3rd best team. They have gone from being the 15th team in the country to a team that to me is wildly deserving of being the number 3 seed in the college football playoff. If we're going to give top 4 to conference champions, I think they're going to secure the 3 seed. I think they deserve it. And look, you mentioned that throw on 4th and 1. And all I kept thinking about, Adam, was like, how easy is it right there for Levitt to just overthrow that adrenaline, that emotion? No, like it just Great the point. Fact that he put that into the right spot, it just speaks to how good this team was. And the other thing is that even we got some comments on social media, and I had somebody today that I was talking to about the game that was saying, hey, you're not factoring the fact that Iowa State has 2,000-yard receivers and Arizona State can't stop that passing attack. Yeah, they can. They did. Right? They stopped it. They ball hawked it. The turnovers were a big part of this. But, man, that defense was flying. That defense was flying around, and the offense was as balanced as it needed to be until they could get Scadaboo where they wanted him to be. I thought what you saw was a balanced, talented football team that absolutely they have the speed, they have the playmakers, they got everything you could possibly need to actually compete in the college football playoff. Like, this isn't a cute conversation anymore. This isn't a, wow, this team was going to suck and they don't conversation. This right now is this team is, I think, we spent a lot of time saying South Carolina, the hottest team in college football. No, right now, Arizona State is the hottest team in college football other than Oregon. And you're going to have to turn around and figure out how to deal with that offense coming into the playoff. They're dangerous. This was a huge statement win for Dillingham and for Arizona State. Congratulations to that team.
And you're 100% right, Fitz, that this was such a balanced day from Arizona State offensively. And keep in mind that they were without their leading receiver, Jordan Tyson. And also keep in mind that their second leading receiver on that team is Cam Scadaboo. And then you look at Melquan Stovall, who I don't think has had a single game with over 50 receiving yards. He was their leading receiver on the day, just shy of 100 yards. You look at Xavier Guillory, who had 2 touchdowns today. It was like, and I don't want this to be taken out of context, but like when Georgia and Alabama were at their peaks and they simply could not be beaten, the difference between those teams was depth. The difference between Alabama and Georgia was the fact that they had 3, 4, 5 deep at any given position. Your leading receiver goes down. Well, here's another 5-star who can just step right in without a hitch. I'm not saying Arizona State is Alabama or Georgia. Do not get that twisted. They're a very good football team. I am not going to go as far as to say they are Alabama of 2015. But what I am saying is that's really impressive depth to have your go-to guy, your number 1 receiver by a wide margin go down. And your passing game, in a way, almost felt like it was even more explosive than before he went down. So I think that is really impressive and makes Arizona State feel even more dangerous, Adam.
Great point, Caroline, on the passing game. I'll say this. The reason that passing game works so well is the scheme that their offensive coordinator, Marcus Arroyo, put together for this game. And he's really done it all season long. Arizona State mastered the box count on offense, and that led to the execution in the RPO game. By box count, that's how many guys are in the box versus how many are out wide. That's what football is. It's all just a numbers game. And Arizona State did it almost to perfection, and it led to Cam Scadaboo's 170 rushing yards. So Arizona State was using a bunch of shift in motion and then those stacked formations to force Iowa State into light boxes, making their linebackers leave the box. And then they were running the ball into 5- and 6-man boxes most of the night, which, I kept thinking about, where is Cam Scadaboo at his best? He's at his best when that guy is running north and south downhill inside a light box. And they got him in those situations with their formations all day long, and Cam Scadaboo could run north and south and be physical, not sideline to sideline, which is what happens when you have a loaded box and you gotta run outside. So great job there by Arroyo. But then the best part is the pass game off of that. I thought Sam Levitt's execution in the RPO game kept Iowa State's defenders frozen most of the day. On plays where Iowa State was overcommitting to stop the run, which started to happen once Cam Scadaboo was having a big day, Levitt then pulled the ball and attacked the voids in those immediate, short to intermediate passing zones, and then led to a great day passing for Arizona State as well. So that balance on offense and then the physicality on the offensive line in the trenches led to the game we saw from their offensive coordinator, Marcus Arroyo. I think he deserves a lot of credit. And his name has not been talked about in football assistant coach circles this season the way I think it should have. He put on a masterclass today.
And it's interesting because peek behind the curtain, I sometimes like to listen to the radio broadcasts while I watch the games, just because I get more out of them. I was listening to the radio broadcast, and so I will credit, I believe it was an ESPN radio broadcast on it during this game. They mentioned Coach, and it's interesting that both the offensive and defensive coordinators have signed 3 years extensions for Arizona State, which gives them some continuity, but also really impressive note. Dillingham has had almost $1 million in bonuses that he's now hit in this season. Most of that $1 million he then spread to his assistant coaches to try and make their lives a little more comfortable to continue to be at Arizona State. It just speaks to the fact that they are trying to build continuity, which is such a difficult thing for so many programs to build. And then you start looking at just the comfort in the offense and the way you can execute when you know what's expected from you week in and week out. It's just, even Adam, you mentioned the RPOs. Like, part of that to me, just watching it, was thinking, man, he was so decisive on when he was pulling the ball. And when he pulled the ball, he got the ball out of his hands so quickly. I don't think there was anything Iowa State could have done to actually defend that. They were outmanned by perfect execution.
My favorite part of Kenny Dillingham after this game too was on social media and on some of the videos I saw. Kenny was already on the phone recruiting right after the win. He was already on the phone talking to recruits. So like, the sleeping giant is now awake at Arizona State. I watched an interview that Kenny Dillingham did before the game, and he talked about, man, for a long time, and you guys know I spent time there, everyone talks about Arizona State being a sleeping giant in college football. Well, I think it's awake now. And this is the beginning, and the foundation of this program is going to be laid on Sam Levitt the next 2 years with Kenny Dillingham. But it's awake. I don't think it's a sleeping giant anymore.
I mean, I don't know how you could watch Kenny Dillingham, listen to what he says, how he advocates for his coaches, for his players, for that program, the energy that he has 24/7, and not say, I want to play for that guy. Like, I want to run through a wall for that guy. So 100% great point. There was another kind of discussion that I saw today, and I do feel like every year we do this collectively as a college football society, since there's only, 5 games on in the weekend that everyone is paying attention to, and that's the only game on in that window. I think we're all guilty of being prisoners of the moment. Should Arizona State's running back be a Heisman finalist? Thank you, there it was. Let me get it out. I think that it's a prisoner of the moment take. I will be completely transparent. I love Cam Scadaboo. He has been electric. He is a large part as to why Arizona State is in the college football playoff. Feels very prisoner of the moment-y.
But this is also part of why I continue to die on the hill that the Heisman voting process should be pushed back. Because if if Scadaboo goes into the playoffs and absolutely continues to do this, just like if Ashton Genty goes into the playoffs and actually runs all over major schools that we're sitting here looking at, or if Dylan Gabriel goes on a run like we've never seen in the college football playoff, like that is going to change so much. We have to understand that I know it's a regular season award, but college football has changed. And now if we're going to give a true who is the most impactful player for this entire season, how can we tell that story if it turns out to be that the person we pick didn't even have the chance to make a playoff impression? So I have a hard time with it. I think it's a bit of a prisoner of the moment to make him that right now, but I will again use this platform to say I wish to God they would move the Heisman Trophy voting back to January.
The argument for why Cam Scadaboo should be, if you're on that take, is that Cam Scadaboo is the most impactful player on the Arizona State team. If he's not on this team, Arizona State loses probably 3-4 more games. And you can make the argument that there's other players in the Heisman race, like a Travis Hunter, who may be doing something very special in college football. But if Travis Hunter's not on that team, how many games do they lose that they didn't that they won? I don't know how much of an impact that really makes on the bottom line when you have a corner and a receiver who's not there. But a guy that's touching the ball as much as Cam Scadaboo is, that's a big impact in the game. So you have a guy who's as impactful as any player in the country on his team, and he's playing on the hottest team in the country that just won the Big 12, and in the Big 12 championship game had 2 touchdowns, averaged 10 yards a carry, 170 yards rushing, and probably about 120 were after contact. So you add all that up, and that sounds like a Heisman contender to me. Now, that's without taking into account who you would have to take off the Heisman stage. He's not going to end up in New York, but I think rightfully so, he should be in the conversation as a top 5 Heisman candidate. And from what we've seen in what the Heisman's all about, I think he is one of the best players in college football, and he's one of the best players in college football on now a conference champion in college football who's going to have a first-round playoff bye.
In terms of the Heisman, at least my personal feeling about it is I think numbers are supplementary to the argument of impact of a team, impact of whatever that role that player plays is the reason why team X, Y, and Z is in the position that they are in. I think that's ultimately why Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy last year, was because without Jaden Daniels, LSU was probably a 6-6 football team. I think that's a massive part of the argument for Ashton Genty is what does Boise State look like without Ashton Genty? Frankly, I don't even have a vision for what that team would look like because Ashton Genty is so much of the heartbeat and the DNA of what that team is. And Cam Scadaboo absolutely fits into that mold of the heartbeat of the team, of such a massive part that he played. And I say prisoner of the moment. I understand that Cam Scadaboo has been putting up these kind of numbers all season long. It's not just what he did in the Big 12 title game. It's what he did on a big stage while everyone was watching. I can't envision Cam Scadaboo being in over another candidate that's heading to New York now. I also, maybe it's not fair to me, I don't see 2 running backs in New York.
Unless we're sending a worthless, like if we're sending a quarterback just to send a quarterback, then send Cam instead. Like there aren't very many quarterbacks that I think truly belong in that conversation this year. Just saying.
Do you believe Dylan Gabriel belongs?
I think when you're the quarterback of the best team in the country, it's inevitable. I think he belongs. I think he belongs, but I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. All right, we'll take a quick break. Coming up next, Big Ten Championship, ACC Championship, Mountain West Championship, all with massive college football playoff implications on the line. We just talked to Ashton Genty. Let's get into it. Mountain West Championship game.
I mean, we can skip this game if you want.
Are you good, Fitz?
I'm sorry.
You've been struggling?
You know what? I was disappointed. I'm not going to lie. I was disappointed. I was bummed. And I can't believe I'm sitting here saying that I'm bummed on a season for UNLV of all teams that ended in the Mountain West Championship game. But it did suck to watch and it was hard to watch because it just wasn't the best of UNLV. Like it was an unfortunate moment where their offense just couldn't click. Their quarterback had a terrible, awful night just getting his feet set when he was throwing the football. Like he just never did. It felt like the cold bothered him way more than I thought it would. And, it was unfortunate. UNLV had opportunities in that game. They just couldn't get it done. Kudos to Boise State for getting a big win. It was a big win, and it is a historic win for Boise State. But, I was bummed to watch UNLV lose.
Yeah, I thought UNLV did what they could. A great effort. And listen, impressive Fitz by Barry Odom and company to get the 10 wins after losing the quarterback. But, I mean, ultimately, the best group of 5 team got the playoff spot. And I'm excited to see how they do in the playoff now that there's all the controversy we heard before the Clemson game played out of who does Arizona State get the seed or not, or get the first round bye or not over Boise. It's not going to matter. But I think now it's going to be interesting to see how these group of 5 teams play in the playoffs, considering Boise hasn't played anyone strong really, other than Oregon. I don't
know, Adam, real quick, stick on that for a second, because I'm genuinely interested in your thoughts on this. Can you be a one-dimensional group of 5 team and beat a Power 4 team in this situation? Because Ashton Jeanty is going to have to get 30 to 35 carries that are going to have to get to 200 yards, and I don't know that you could just. I don't know that you can be that one thing and just pound that one thing if you're taking on a Notre Dame or if you're taking on even an Ohio State or a Penn State in this or a Tennessee in this situation.
Well, it's a great question. Now, I'll say this, Fitz. I don't think that I saw a Boise State team today that was too one-dimensional. I thought that Boise State was able to throw the ball when they had to, which actually was the difference in this game. Now, I don't think Boise State matches up well with the Power 4 teams that we're going to see in the playoffs. So I think that this whole a group of 5 team being guaranteed to get a playoff spot is going to end up looking like a silly decision. I could be wrong. I don't think Boise State's played that well all season long. I thought, think about Boise State against Wyoming. I mean, they looked like a bad team. Now they look better against
3 weeks ago?
Yeah, correct. It was recent. So I think Boise State's going to struggle in the playoffs and will lose to a Power 4 team, as I think most will expect them to. But to that point, Fitz, on the balance piece, I thought that really where Boise State ended up winning this game was UNLV early in the game, as most people do against Boise, frequently was loading the box with 8 to 9 defenders to stop Ashton Jeanty. But that's when Boise early in the game, kind of relied on Maddox Madsen to attack the perimeter with those short passes out wide and the high percentage throws, and he executed on those. Then that forced UNLV safeties to respect the passing game, created a lighter box in the second half, and then that's when Boise capitalized on the dominant run game, highlighted by the 75, 76-yard run by Ashton Jeanty in the end of the second quarter. So it was that kind of game of cat and mouse where UNLV loaded the box, throw the ball with Madsen. When they played off, run the ball with Ashton Jeanty. And when Boise can play like that, they're a really good team. So I thought they do kind of have that balance on offense to win these types of games. I also thought Boise's plan of getting UNLV into must-pass situations worked wonders. UNLV is a much better rushing team than people expect, especially given their offensive numbers this year. But this is a balanced UNLV offense, and Boise State taking away the run crippled UNLV in this game. UNLV average third down attempt was 3rd down and 8, way too long for sustaining drives, and ultimately Boise executed the plan on both sides of the ball almost to perfection.
I felt that, by the way, when UNLV went down 21-0. It was like, man, this just jacks the entire game plan the way this offense is built. Like, I know it's built to run a lot of plays, and I know the go-go offense is fun to watch, but yeah, it felt like it got away from them once it was 21-0.
That was the difference, really, was third downs. Because if you just look at the box score, it feels like it should be a much more evenly matched game. I mean, both sides ran for about 220 yards, about 6 yards a crack. I mean, penalties, it wasn't an overwhelming advantage one way or another. UNLV had that one turnover before half, but it wasn't enough time for Boise State to really do anything with that extra possession. Like, overall, there wasn't a massive swing one way or another on the box score in the middle of the game where Boise State had a clear advantage, but it was kind of hidden in third downs and opportunities that UNLV wasn't able to take. I will say, Maddox Madsen is the coolest name ever. Sounds like a Roman warrior.
Maddox Madsen is a rock star name. That's an
awesome name. Awesome name. Okay, so if we're going to make Fitz get a little sad for a second, it's your turn, Adam. Let me just say, I'm the only one on this podcast whose team didn't lose tonight. Team didn't play tonight, but they also didn't lose tonight. So the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Adam, I am sorry about your Penn State Nittany Lions who fell to Oregon in the Big Ten title game. But is it fair for me to say, and this is not patronizing, this is not me trying to make you feel better, even in a loss against Oregon, I feel much better about how competitive Penn State can be in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I feel much, much better about Penn State after watching how they battled against Oregon. I thought, Penn State went down early in that game. It looked early like it could be a blowout. And I was thinking, this is not going to be good. This is not what Penn State needed, a blowout against Oregon, another big game. But Penn State battled, man. And I thought that they continuously fought in this game. And for their offense to be able to keep up was huge in this game. To go drive for drive with an Oregon offense that can score points at one of the highest clips in the country and be able to compete was really good to see for Penn State. I'm disappointed that Penn State didn't win, but I am very excited for the community of State College, for Penn State, for the fan base at Penn State, for Coach Franklin to host a playoff game in Beaver Stadium. If Penn State would have won this game, I would have had a little bit of like a 10% of sadness that Penn State wasn't going to get a home playoff game. It's going to be electric. It's great for the community. I think it'll be cool for people, for the national audience to see Penn State and be good for the program. So I'm excited about that. And if Penn State carries over that offensive performance from tonight, I like the chances again in a home game against any team 9 through 12 in the playoff. Any team there. So I thought when it comes to the actual game, there were two opportunities to change the game for Penn State. They come back down from down 28-10 to be down 7 at half, 31-24. You have to score on the first drive of the second half there. Instead, they come up empty and then wind up down 14 again, 38-24. So that first drive of the second half was critical for Penn State. They didn't run the ball well that drive and put themselves in a third down and long, ended up having to punt. The other area was you get a stop and score to make it 38-30, and then Oregon went on a 12-play back-breaking drive that Penn State forced a fumble on and gave up a fourth down conversion. So two opportunities right there to get the ball back down 38-30, and Oregon kind of took the life out of Penn State. So there were chances there. Also, Drew Aller's interception in the first half of this game, killer, because they went down 2 scores there, and that's where Penn State after that they were scoring, on their possessions after that. But once they went down 2 scores there, it was a big point in this game. So I think there's a lot of excitement around Penn State, but ultimately Oregon deserves to be the Big Ten champion. Consistent, most consistent team in college football. One of the best quarterbacks we've seen in the last decade of college football, beating both Ohio State and Penn State. Pretty big statement for Dan Lanning to come in year one of the Big Ten and dominate the way they did.
Every single team that makes the college football playoff tomorrow, not named Penn State, should send Penn State flowers, though, because Penn State just put film out on what to do against Oregon. Like, look, there's no nice way to say this. Oregon, the number 1 team in the country, got gashed running the football. Just absolutely decimated. And it was patient running by Penn State. It was really good blocking up front. It was backs never stopping their legs. I watched this and I thought, man, the number 1 team in the country right now is getting run on in ways that I would never have imagined. And you can't tell me in a copycat college football world, every coach isn't sitting there saying, okay, how do we do that? What do we have to do to replicate that? Like, we've been looking for the huge crack in the armor this year for an Oregon team that I think, frankly, has been graded on a curve all year. We've had really high expectations for them. But this was a letdown moment for them defensively. They got to figure out how to show up and stop the run. Because to me, Adam, everybody's going to spend the next 3 weeks looking at it saying, I got weeks to get ready. Just start prepping. The scouting coaches that are looking at advanced weeks are going to start looking at it and saying, how do we take what Penn State did and bring it to our offense to make sure that we kick the snot out of them right up the gut, right up the middle, right up gouging them through the center of that line. Because that's exactly, Penn State did it over and over and over again in this game.
I think the answer to that is find yourself a Nick Singleton and a Katron Allen.
Well, that's fair.
That might be the secret sauce and the secret recipe for Penn State. It was just, there were so many times in this game where I felt like, all right, Oregon's going to run away with this one. All right, Penn State's going to tuck their tail between their legs and they're going to fall back and Oregon's going to do what Oregon does and they're going to pull away. Penn State never did that. There was never a point in when I thought Oregon could have run away with it. Well, here comes Penn State coming right back in, keeping themselves in it. Like when Drew Aller had that interception before half, that was almost returned for a pick 6. Oregon got the ball back, ended up scoring anyways because they got the ball and Penn State's won. So now Oregon's up 28-10. Well, Penn State gets the ball back and they orchestrate an 8-play, 75-yard touchdown drive. And then Oregon gets the ball back. They punt. Penn State gets the ball back. They score again. Now, all of a sudden, that cushy lead that Oregon thought that they had is just 4 points up, 28-24. And then at that point, Adam, that you mentioned when Oregon went up 45-30, or maybe you mentioned 38-30, but Oregon scored 45-30. And I thought, okay, now that has got to be, the fork that is in Penn State, and they are done. Like, I thought it killed them. It could have. Then Penn State gets the ball back and they orchestrate yet another scoring drive. Like, every time I wanted to count them out, I couldn't.
On a 4th down and 10 in the red zone, Penn State scored on the Drew Aller pass to Harrison Wallace with a guy hanging on his back. So
that was awesome.
Listen, I thought that Drew Aller had some really good moments in this game. He had some not very good moments. He missed a couple throws. The interception you just mentioned, Carolina, in the second quarter. I mean, it was the right play, the right read. Just threw it behind his tight end and got picked off. There were a couple plays. Aller threw the interception at the end of the game. So I thought there were a couple plays in this game that Aller would like that back, but overall played gritty and played pretty tough. I do want to take a stance here on a lot of social media hate. I mean, my DMs and mentions were flooded with the decision by James Franklin when they scored to go down 38-30 to go for 2 in that moment instead of kicking the extra point to make it a 7-point game. So the scenario was Penn State scored, they're down 38-30, have a decision. Extra point makes it a 7-point game, 2-point conversion makes it a 6-point game at that point. James Franklin decides to go for 2. They don't get it. Everyone's freaking out on social media. Like, why would you go for 2 in that situation? It's now an 8-point game. And I just want to explain to the listeners why the analytics say to go for it in that situation. The first step in that situation is making the decision that if it were an end of game situation and you have a chance to kick an extra point and take it to overtime or go for 2 and win the game, which one would you do? And Penn State made the decision early, probably in the week. You don't make the decision on game day. You make it in your analytics meeting during the week on Thursday. Hey, if we have this chance, Penn State said, we are going to try to win this in regulation. We're going to take our chance and try to win it last play of the game and go for 2 to win it if we had the opportunity. So what happens is you would rather go for 2 the possession earlier so that you know if you get it or not. That's what the analytics tell you. So Penn State right there, down 38-30 after their touchdown, the chance to go for 2 to make it a 6-point game, then a touchdown extra point wins you the game. It's over at that point. So the decision by Franklin was saying, 1, we would try to end it in regulation, and we don't want to go to overtime with Oregon. Let's take our chances and try to win the Big Ten title right here in the fourth quarter. And we want to go for 2 now so that if we don't get it, we at least know that we didn't get it, and we can play that way the rest of the game. So whether you agree with it, the right call or not, it is what the analytics and the numbers tell you to do. You would always rather go for 2 earlier in the game if you can, rather than end the game on a 2-point conversion, because if you don't get it, you got nothing. You have no opportunity to make up for it. So that's the decision that went into it. I think it was the right call for Coach Franklin at the time, trying to win that game because Penn State doesn't want to go to overtime with Oregon. So there was so much hate on that on social media. I wanted to just explain how that at least comes to be, that's the decision that gets made.
Of course there was hate because it didn't work. If it was a successful 2-point conversion, then everyone would be chanting James Franklin's name in the streets and would get T-shirts printed with his face on them. Like, that is the ebb and the flow and the glory and the agony of some of these decisions of going for 2 or going for it on 4th down. When it works, you're a genius, and when it doesn't, you're an idiot. But football doesn't work like that. It's a lot easier for us as armchair quarterbacks to judge a decision when we know the outcome. I always view it, if you feel like you're the underdog, then you have to be more risky. You have to try and end it in regulation. If you feel like you're the better team, take it to overtime. And ultimately, the longer and longer you play, the more and more your talent and your strengths will begin to shine through. I do not think that Penn State was in a position where they felt like they were the superior football team, Fitz.
I also think it's important to note here, as Adam referenced, the analytics say to go for 2. Like that, a lot of people have a hard time understanding, but that is what the analytics say. This is a predetermined decision. The other part of it, when I have a problem with analytics in general, is when I feel like the game flow is so different than the stats that you can't do it. Your gut has to tell you. That was not this situation. Like, you're talking about two teams that were scoring at will on each other. To me, if anything, the game flow really supported, we got to go for two here because we know we can't stop them and we know they can't stop us. And if we're going to get into that situation and this is going to be that shootout, like, I felt like the game flow, the gut reaction, the feel of all of it matched what the analytics tell you to do. Like, that only makes it an even smarter decision. When he went for it, my first thought was, hell yeah, I understand exactly what you're doing. So I just think people need to understand that, the numbers have changed in studies. This has all been studied for a reason. So I had no problem with the decision, and I actually supported the decision more based on the flow of the game.
And Coach Franklin's a guy that follows the analytics pretty much to a T in every decision he's making. It's funny talking to different head coaches about the analytics, and you guys hear everyone talk about the book, like the analytics book, and how, these programs get a book every single week that is updated based on how their team has played, who's hurt, who's not. It comes in on Thursdays. So they know the schedule, they know the roster. It's based on the spread of the game, who's predicted to win. Are you on the road? What's the future look like? And the book ends up giving you all these scenarios based on, that thing's 400 pages. You can flip through and track a chart based on how much you're down by in the game, how much time is left, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of coaches believe that you follow the book to a T because it's a math formula the whole way. And as soon as you don't follow it for one thing, you throw off everything else in the book. The math formula is now off. Like, if you don't punt it, if you go for it if you punt when the book tells you to go for it, you now threw off what it's going to tell you to do the next 3 times because it calculates in you following it to a T. So I was talking to Jeff Monken, Army head coach, and he was like I follow that thing like to perfection because like if I mess up the math formula, it's going to mess up every book I get from now on. So it's interesting, and I'm sure Coach Franklin does the same thing. But you hear analytics so much, and I think sometimes fans don't realize like this isn't just like some analytics data guide. Like there's a whole formula that's put together for each game specifically based on the scenario that each team is in and how much they need to win, how much risk they can take, all that kind of stuff.
I love you're also like, if you start deciding that you're going to follow it sometimes and you're not going to follow it other times, like, look, as a human being, I'm very much like, what's the rules say? What's the instruction say? I follow it. That's like the musician in me, right? Like, if I do exactly what I'm told as I'm told. But part of the reason I've always been the sort of person that does that is because once you stop doing it that way, now all of a sudden, every single time you're in a choose your own adventure of life, where you're like, well, is this the time I'm going to follow it or not follow it or not follow it? And in an NFL, in a game in general, NFL or college football, if you're in the game in the moment and you've got all this adrenaline, the last thing you need is another variable to add to it. Like this is like blackjack for all the people that, I hit on 16, I don't hit on 16. That's my rule. Once that's your rule, by God, that's your rule. If you are going to follow the book, follow the book. So I think this is, Caroline, you're right. We have a visceral, like the community has a visceral reaction to it because we think, oh, no, this is stupid. And we presume that analytics is some like nerd with like bifocals in the back room that's never seen a real football game that's like punching in numbers and coaches aren't like thinking through this whole process. This is like talking to an expert. It's no different than talking to a trainer. It's no different talking to your offensive coordinator. Like, it's a data point. And if you're going to follow the data points, you got to follow the data points.
Analytics make me tired sometimes, though. It's like, I feel like...
Are you anti-analytics?
I'm not anti-analytics, okay? I'm not the mean jock bully at the high school cafeteria that's like throwing the nerds' milk around and, making fun of the mathletes. That's not what it is. But like, I feel like there are some cases when the analytics say go for it. Like on ESPN when they have the green button that says go. And it's like, no, that's just stupid. Like, I feel like it's a way to use it as a crutch of, oh, we didn't get it on 4th down, we didn't get a 2-point conversion, well, the analytics told us to go for it. Well, maybe you shouldn't have. And there is an element of feel. There is an element of, we thought on Tuesday when we were putting our game plan in place that we were going to do this, but now all fast forward, there's all of these new different data points and there's all of these things in game feel and maybe injuries play a factor into it. Maybe weather plays a factor into it, whatever it might be, that changes maybe what you initially anticipated that you were going to do. I think feel and flow of the game is also such a massive part of that.
I don't disagree with that, by the way. Real quick, I'll say this. Like, as a Raiders fan, I know it's a college football podcast, but as a Raiders fan earlier, the Raiders got killed earlier this year for punting on a 4th and 1, and everybody said, well, how could you do it? Well, they're the worst team I've ever seen in my life on fourth and short situations. At some point, the book will tell you to go for it. It's like, with these guys, no, I'm good. No, I do think you have to have feel at some point, but in this game, the feel and the analytics all had to align. Like there was no, that. I think that's part of why I supported the decision so much, is that I can't find a reason why you wouldn't do that other than it didn't work. And that's not a reason to not do it.
It made sense.
My last comment on the analytics, I think I heard a coach say this one time, and it changed my perspective on it. The book is always, the analytics are always looking more at how you win the game than like how you avoid losing the game. And I think when fans start to realize that, they'll understand analytics more. So it thinks way more about if your percentage of converting a fourth down, if your percentage chance of winning, if you convert, goes up more than your percentage chance of losing goes down, then it's always going to tell you to go. So it's like always thinking more about how can we win. So if it's a 4th and 2 on your own 30-yard line, but if you get it, the game's over, it's probably going to tell you to go for it, because you still, if you don't get it,
well, the other team still has to kick a field goal.
So like that, but I guess that's how those situations end up being a go on the analytics, because it's thinking more about if you get it, the game's over, like you're going to win, not thinking about, if you don't get it, you're not guaranteed to lose if you don't get it. You still have a chance to fight another day. You're not in a good situation, but it's more about how you win than how you avoid losing, if that makes sense.
But sometimes that kind of has to be your coaching, philosophy is, if we don't get this, we might lose. And I laugh at it sometimes, like watching, whether it's college football or NFL, whatever. It's, it's 4th and 13 from your own 25, but analytics give you the thumbs up. They say go for it. And it's like, what? That is insane. We got all day long to moan about analytics. Let's get to the last game of the day, the ACC Championship game, the game that has already, over the last week, caused more drama than any other conference championship game, and it'll only continue until the the college football playoff rankings come out on Sunday morning. Again, this is a podcast that we're recording on Saturday night. So Clemson wins it. Everybody buy a drink for all of your favorite kickers in your life. Nolan Hauser, 56-yard field goal, Clemson's kicker to win it 34-31. Now, I think we can all say Clemson's not getting a first round bye, but Clemson's getting into the playoff, something that they would not be doing if they did not win this football game. The more important thing is, what did SMU show us today? Even in a loss, Fitz, what did SMU show the College Football Playoff Committee?
Well, look, they started inexcusably slow in this game, and they took some serious punches in the first quarter, got themselves into a hole, but they dug out of it, and they dug out of it in a pretty impressive way. They got the late drive that I thought was going to be enough to at least send the game to overtime. Turns out that's not the case. I think their ability to fight through this was a little bit of Clemson being what Clemson has been sometimes this year. Second half offense has been an issue for this team, but SMU fighting through was fairly significant to me. They lost a tough football game, and man, this is an inexcusable moment for them because they had so much on the line. But man, I still think they'll get credit from the committee for fighting back. I think SMU could have folded. They did not.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we'll see what happens tomorrow with SMU and the committee. There were times where it looked like SMU, they're going to get blown out by 3 touchdowns. They're completely out of the playoff. They fight back. It was impressive. Jennings played well down the stretch. So there were good things about SMU. But, man, I really keep coming back to Clemson as the story in this whole thing and how it could really shake up the landscape of the college football playoff. You think about this Clemson team that isn't supposed to be here, that needed a Miami loss to even get in the conference title game, that lost to South Carolina in their final game of the season, who's not going to be in the playoff, but we can talk about that in another time. You guys know how I feel about South Carolina missing the playoff. But this is a Clemson team that has a quarterback in Cade Klubnik who's playing extremely well. 4 touchdown passes in this game. Right when you counted them out, Cade Klubnik's still there standing. SMU outplayed Clemson in the second half, but sometimes a fast start can be too much to overcome it. That's exactly what Clemson did in this game. Clemson's the type of team that is talented enough to be a tough draw for anyone in the playoff. They'll probably get their draw as the 12th seed in the playoff, and then they're going to have to go to Texas or Notre Dame most likely, and it'll be with zero pressure. zero pressure because Clemson wasn't even supposed to be here. It'll be entirely fun to go and play in a playoff game for Clemson. There's been so much pressure around Clemson with Dabo Swinney and how they build their program and the chatter in the offseason and NIL and transfer portal, and Clemson doesn't take transfers. So much pressure, so much negativity. This might be exactly what Clemson needed. They're going to have a spirited practice. They're going to go in there with full belief. It's almost as if Clemson got a second life with this. They get a second chance at this whole thing. They can forget all the negativity that people have talked about, and now they get a chance to prove some people wrong. They were gifted an ACC title berth after their loss, like I said, and now they get to cut it loose. So I'm excited to see how Clemson plays. But because you got a Cade Klubnik playing quarterback that had 11 rushing attempts in this game. How about that? I mean, who would have thought Cade Klubnik would run the ball 11 times? That's not including sacks. And so I think he had like 14 total, 11 actual rushing attempts. Someone needed to step up for Clemson in this game, and Cade Klubnik did it. Bryant Wesco did just that as well with 2 touchdowns receiving. So I'm excited about Clemson, man, because I've doubted Dabo Swinney for a long time, but I think this is the team that's good enough to give someone a tough draw in the first round. Yeah,
but likely, we'll know this tomorrow, but as we sit right now, Clemson is likely to be the 12 seed, right? And if they're the 12, if Clemson is sitting at 12, then Clemson would be taking on likely Penn State. Do we think that just based on what we've seen, do you think Clemson is really ready to put up a fight at Happy Valley? I don't. I think Clemson's going to walk into the playoff and get their ass kicked.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that I don't think they're going to get their ass kicked. I don't think Clemson matches up well with the Penn State team. I don't think that they're going to win that game. But what I'm saying is that a Clemson team 3 weeks ago, you would have asked me, Clemson loses by 30 points to these teams, 21 points to these teams. I now think this is a Clemson team that could be a completely different team in the playoff than the one we've seen all season long. And I've been in those scenarios where when you get something go your way and you can get some momentum like having a team that has nothing to lose is scary. That's going to be a Clemson team that goes out there and is fighting in the first round of the playoffs and is running trick plays and playing in a way we haven't seen Dabo Swinney play. I think that makes up for maybe a 10-point differential in the quality of the team, right? And if they're maybe 10 points worse than a Penn State team, I'd be scared to play a Dabo Swinney team that's just out there flying around, cutting it loose and having fun without a ton of pressure because they're not even supposed to be there. I think that psychological part plays into this.
If that is the case, if it is in fact Clemson on the road at Happy Valley, which feels like it's probably going to be more than likely, if Clemson wins that game, what's the commentary with Penn State fans?
Not good.
Not good at all. It would be sheer and utter meltdown from Penn State fans. But nobody gets in trouble for something that hasn't happened yet. And that has not happened yet. But this feels like the ultimate nightmare scenario for Alabama. Like there was probably a few things that they were cheering for to happen, and this was the absolute last thing. Clemson winning and getting into the playoff, and SMU playing just well enough to have a case to get in over Alabama. I would still put Alabama in over SMU because my case is still the same today as it was last week. They still have not beaten anybody. They have not beaten anybody. They had an opportunity to beat a Clemson team that would not have even been in the playoff had they not been in the ACC Championship game, and they still couldn't beat Clemson. So I would still put Alabama in, but I understand the argument for SMU.
I also hate Fitz. You're the committee, my committee expert that I always go to. I hate how the committee said that teams that don't play can't move in the rankings. I mean,
I hate that too.
South Carolina has now beaten the ACC champion 2 weeks ago as part of their run to improve them having the best resume of those 3 SEC teams with 3 losses: Bama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. So I know it ain't going to happen. South Carolina ain't going to make the playoffs, it sounds like, at least from what we've been told and from the committee. But, I mean, does the resume not change a little bit when you beat a conference champion 2 weeks ago?
I agree with you 1,000%. I think that when Ward Manuel said that was going to be the case, I was stunned. I think that's the wrong approach. I will say this, Caroline. The only thing I'd say is that last week, SMU still hadn't played anybody, and last week the committee still had them above Alabama. I don't know how it'll play out. We'll see tomorrow. I do know as we tape right now, I just looked, and Heather Dinich, a good friend who covers this thing better than anybody, has written her projections on ESPN.com. She currently has projected that Clemson will be the 12 seed and that SMU will be the 11 seed, that Alabama will be left out. I don't know. Early on in this game, I felt like, man, Alabama had to feel pretty good. If SMU was going to lose, let them get thumped. And so it's such a thorough butt whooping that it doesn't matter. The minute this thing got close at the end, the whole time I was thinking the committee now, and I will stress again to people, we'll talk about this tomorrow, but this is the one weekend of the entire season that the committee sits in the room and they watch these games together. So this weekend's games, they just have more impact because everybody's sitting there talking, just like you are with your buddies, eating popcorn and snacks while you're watching this game. They watch that SMU team just fired up the second half. I think that's going to be stuck in their heads.
And that looks absolutely miserable, by the way. That room they were watching the games in. Did you see the picture?
Like the most boring football
terrible.
watching
I had a better
world.
setup at my apartment. I mean, they're like the TVs were like barely. I mean, I was like,
there's a better setup at jury duty. That looks so freaky boring.
It's at a Gaylord, too. Like, it's at a Gaylord Opryland, like in Texas. Those places are huge. Those Opryland hotels are massive. They got to have a whole wall somewhere they could just turn into movie theater, like, screens with bunches of TVs. Like, yeah, no, that was absolutely ridiculous.
Last point I will make on the whole SMU Alabama gate. To your point, Adam, about South Carolina beating the ACC champion. Well, Alabama beat the SEC champion. Like, does that not make their resume stronger? Like, I understand that South Carolina did it last week, and Alabama did it a few months ago even. I understand that, but, like, it still happened. I think that we all want to conveniently forget things that happened in weeks, 4, 5, or 6, or whatever it is, just based off of whatever argument you're making. But it's the truth for Alabama, too. But the point remains, we are arguing flawed teams. Like, we are arguing an inconsistent Alabama team that has losses against teams they had no business losing to. And we are also arguing an SMU team that hasn't beaten anybody. So we're arguing the flaws. And that's what you subject yourself to when you lose 3 games or you don't have a very high strength of schedule and you're right on the bubble. This is what happens.
I will quickly say, unprecedented year in college football. We have loved covering this every single week. It is funny to me that tomorrow when we get the rankings, Clemson, maybe Alabama, Texas, Georgia, like all the teams that we're used to being at Oregon, Notre Dame, all the teams that we're used to, Penn State, all the teams are pretty much like, yes, there are some outliers that are in this and that makes it fun, but let's not get it twisted. Most of the names that we're really talking about here, we've been talking about for years anyway.
Indiana has entered the chat.
Indiana,
Boise State has entered the chat.
It is crazy that you just mentioned Heather's predictions for the playoff. It is crazy that we could get an SMU team ranked ahead of the ACC title winner who gets a first round. I'm sorry, not a first round, but gets an automatic bid to the playoffs. So we could have an SMU at 11 and Clemson at 12. Is a real scenario where the champions rank below another team in the conference that's not the champion.
She said here, when Kansas State beat TCU to win the Big 12, TCU was still ranked higher and went to the CFP as one of the top 4 teams in the country. By being ranked outside of the committee's top 12, the Tigers will bump out the number 12 team. That's her prediction. That's just a prediction. We'll know in 12 hours. We're going to be back together in 12 hours to figure this out.
This is just so perfectly weird. We love it. But yeah, like Fitz said, we'll be back on Sunday with a full reaction to Selection Day. I have learned that it is not Selection Sunday. So keep that in your back pocket. It's Selection Day. We'll be back wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, on sports.yahoo.com. We'll be back here with an immediate and full reaction to Selection Day. We'll preview the matchups. What did the committee get right? What did the committee get wrong? All of that right back here on the College Football Power Hour. But that's going to do it for us today. Fun little conference championship weekend. That's Adam Breneman at Adam Breneman81 on Twitter. He is at Jason Fitz. You can find me at Caroline Fenton 1. So like, review, subscribe, comment, all of those great things. Always appreciate y'all for following along the podcast, for interacting with the podcast. Tell a friend, tell someone you hate, tell a UNLV fan, tell a kicker. Shout out to kicker. Big day for kickers today. But we will be back tomorrow for Selection Day. We'll see you soon.